To kick off the all-hands call, we're going to recognize 16 outstanding individuals who have made the important decision to continue serving their nation by way of re-enlistment. Attention to discharge. From the Armed Forces of the United States of America, this is to certify that the sailors standing before us have been honorably discharged from the United States Navy on this day of February 2026. The certificate each of you will receive is awarded as a testimonial of your honest and faithful service. Signed, Daryl Caudle, Admiral, United States Navy, Chief of Naval Operations. Admiral Caudle will now administer the oath of enlistment. Attention to the oath.
Would you raise your right hand and repeat after me? I state your name. You're going to have to do it a little bit louder than that. We're going to start over. I state your name. Do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and that I will obey the orders of the President of the United States and the orders of the officers appointed over me, according to regulation and the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So help me God. Congratulations.
Audience, please stand at ease or take your seats. CSCS, Michael Hannaford. LSC, Tenzin Chukduk. LSC, Okisha Daly. EMNC, Stephanie Picadillo. ITR-1, Juan Miguel Jimenez. LS-1, Rashad Menifee. MC-1, Nicholas Carter. PS-1, Andrew Samuel. First row, right face, take your seats. YN1, Vaughn Johnson. YN1, Christian Winnefeld. YN2, Tegan Cribbs. CS2, Amber Hunt. LS2, Nathaniel Lafka. LS2, Rachel Wiley. MA3, Malin Reyes. And HN, Johannes Sebastian Baricua. Second row, right face to your seats. How about a round of applause for today's re-enlisters? CNO, MCPON, the mic floor is yours.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Hey, before I kick it over to the CNO, I just wanted to take a minute and thank every single one of you for deciding to serve our great nation. All right, there is a vanishingly small number of people in our country who are willing to do what you do every day, and there's an even smaller percentage that can qualify to do what you do every day. So I am very appreciative, not only for our new sailors who are on their first tour, but for the rest of you who have decided to continue to do this. You know, this is a decision you get to make every 4 to 6 years on whether or not you want to continue to serve. And that decision for a lot of you is also not your own, right? Your families are involved in that decision. You know, the CNO and I like to talk about, and you've all heard this before, you know, we recruit a sailor, but we retain a family. And so please pass to your families how appreciative we are of their willingness to support you in your endeavor to continue to serve your country. All right, it's pretty awesome. I'm very proud to serve with you and be your MCPON. And before I give the mic to the CNO, for our civilian teammates, I also want to thank you, because you also have unlimited choices on what you could do. Right? You could choose to stay in the States, not have to deal with the hiring and PCS challenges, you know, that exist to come work here, and do what is incredibly important work for us. You know, we often have to remind people that while the military is kind of the business end, we cannot do anything without our civilian teammates. Nothing works if they're not here. And for a lot of our civilian teammates, you know, which I didn't realize until recently, a lot of them are also in the reserves, right? So they not only are over here serving day to day in their civilian capacity, but they're also on the hook. You know, should the unthinkable happen and we have to go to war, then they're going to be right alongside us taking care of business. So thank you all very much for your willingness to serve. The CNO and I are incredibly proud of you. Got some fantastic briefs from Admiral Wyckoff and Admiral Anderson today on the phenomenal work that happens here day in and day out. So thank you very much for that, and CNO, over to you.
All right. Give it up for the MCPON. First, I just want to say thank you to Admiral Wyckoff, Admiral Anderson for hosting us today. Like the MCPON said, a great morning getting re-immersed for me back into what goes on here at Naples. And one of the finest places I've ever worked, one of the greatest opportunities I've ever had in the Navy. And it feels good to get back home. And I'm certainly looking forward to some pizza tonight. And I mean, it sounds cliche, but when you leave it, boy, you miss it. And it's good. And the wine's not too bad either. But so thank you, sir, for hosting us. And I also want to just introduce and make known that I made the decision to make my wife and the MCPON's wife, Angie, and my wife, Donna, our co-ombudsman at large. And that, you know, they travel on their own, but in this case, they came to me on this trip. I don't know if that's feedback from me or something else. Okay, that's good. That was annoying. Anyway, they're here to learn about family quality of life, family quality of service, and sailor quality of life, of course. And so they'll be doing things separate than us. And so I want the family members, and they engage with sailors, to be open and frank with them. And they have our ear and our commitment to get after the things that you bring to them. So thank you, Donna and Angie, for being part of this trip, and thank you for what you do for our families. When I became the CNO, I knew that this was going to happen when I ever got to this position, and I didn't think it would ever happen because you never can guess these things. Part of life is about timing and being at the right place at the right time a bit. But I knew if I ever got to this level that I was going to make sailors my priority and be unapologetic for that. I spent a lot of my time as a senior officer trying to convince senior leadership in our Navy that if you take the risk to unapologetically make sailors first, then that's the toughest problem to solve. I've got a lot of people that work on the capabilities we employ, the missile systems, the torpedoes, the aircraft, the ships. I got a whole five-sided building that does nothing but work on that problem set. But I have found the only people that are working on you is me, okay? And that's why I make you front and center. And I think the return on investment by doing that is I gain this already incredible team of people and make you even better. I help make you achieve the level of mastery you deserve, to give you the competency to come to work so you're confident in what you need to do. I work every day to try to take some things out of your rucksack to make your life frictionless as possible. Simple things like trying to ensure you get paid on time, okay? Things like making sure that the daycare centers are adequate in size, scale, scope, and quality. To make sure the unaccompanied barracks are more like a college dormitory that have Wi-Fi and decent bandwidth Wi-Fi so you can actually surf the internet and perhaps, to some extent, certainly reach back home and maybe some gaming in there as well. So I want these things to let you know that that level gets to me, and I want to make sure you understand it matters. How you're fed from a nutrition perspective matters to me, okay? How I give you the ability to go get fit matters to me. How I give you access to world-class mental health capacity and capabilities matters to me, all right? So all these things that actually allow you to enable you and empower you to actually be the best you can be as you're working here in Naples is all good return on investment, in my opinion. I ask you to do a very hard thing. I ask you to fight for your country, okay? I ask you to sometimes go into harm's way, conduct lethal operations. It is the least I can do to make sure that we give you the tools and capabilities and just the quality of life services you need to do that for me in return. And so I kind of treat you like world-class athletes. Now, that doesn't all happen overnight. So it's a bit of a journey. And so if I'm not meeting the mark on those things, please feed that back to me. I take those things very seriously, and I will devote my time to go work on those very hard. So I just want to put that out first. I'm going to just put three things out because I really want to spend time for Q&A. So be putting your thinking caps on. I really want some tough questions. So be thinking what you want to ask us. That's what we're here for. I also made a commitment when I became CNO that I would break the Navy down into something kind of simple. Because I want it to be simple, because I found if you can describe what we do in a way that's easy to describe, then it resonates more with how we kind of frame it. It resonates more with how we integrate it, and it certainly can be described to the joint force and to other people of our nation in a digestible way. And so my worldview is built on three pillars, and the first one is the foundry. And I kind of, to be honest, I took that word from Admiral Grady when I relieved him at U.S. Fleet Forces Command. I like the word foundry. First of all, I like the Forged in Fire series, and so the foundry kind of made sense to me. But the foundry is the compilation of everything we do in the Navy that allows our Navy to project power, okay? We're sitting in a piece of foundry in this hangar. When you go to a schoolhouse, that's part of the foundry. When we build a ship at a shipyard, that's the foundry, okay? When you eat at the galley, that's the foundry. When you're in your barracks, that's the foundry. When you're using a computer system to do your job in the mock, that's part of the foundry, okay? And so when you put foundry first, then I almost get my second two, the fleet and fight, as an outcome. So by investing in the foundry, and some CNO actually has to go make that a priority because it's hard to do, because again, the five-sided building loves to work on capabilities at the Pentagon. You can make the foundry a priority, and I get these outcomes that I think are very important to me, okay? Number two, it is the fleet. The fleet is important because That is the Navy's differentiated value to the Joint Force, our differentiated value to the nation. It is the most decisive unit of power that the Joint Force gives, okay? We are mobile, we are persistent, we are sustainable, we are expeditionary, and best of all, we are sovereign. So when we move kit into theater, it comes with the United States flag to project that power, and no other element of the Joint Force can do that the way the United States does. So that is a very special attribute that we can never forget. And we do that because we fight as a fleet. Now that fleet can be broken into sub-elements, and we do that all the time. But at its most substantial unit, it is the fleet. And the leadership on the front row here fight as a fleet every single day, and you support that mission. And then the last one is indeed how we fight, okay? And that's where forward deployed forces like you make your money. You help me as the CNO convey to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, to the Secretary of the Navy, to the Secretary of War, and to the President himself what the Navy can offer for options in the fight. You're building concepts of operations, concepts of employment, schemes of maneuver, timing and tempo, bringing to bear robotic and autonomous systems, bringing to bear logistics forces, taking down motor tankers, to tracking high-end server events, to actually ballistic missile defense in the Eastern Mediterranean. That is a big swath of mission. It's huge what this team does here at Naval Forces Europe and Africa. And I could not be more proud of what you do every single day. I watch it closely. I talk to your leadership all the time. And I just want you to know that you have my undivided attention. And if I can do anything to enable that fight to be done more effectively, more lethal, and more seamlessly, then let me know, and I'll work on that too. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Q&A, and I look forward to addressing your questions. The MCPON and I will try to do the best we can do, and if I can't answer it, we'll take it down and we'll get back to you. So don't hesitate. Somebody be first. I'll say while somebody's walking to the mic here too is the sky's the limit. So don't think the question's too tactical and don't think it's too broad. We'll answer anything, we'll try to.
Hello, Zwine to Zakor. My question is, what is the Navy doing to address the sailors that are coming out of pocket for BAA, for rental properties when they're in high cost living areas?
Yeah, let me give you the broad answer to that scheme, and then maybe you give some examples, maybe as a couple use cases. I'll start with a little bit of an initiative that I've been working on that ties to your question. It may not apply to folks here that are part of the Naples team, but when I got in the seat, and it's just something that's so common sense, I found it offensive that I still got sailors that live on ships, okay? No one's mailing address should be a ship, okay? That's just not a thing. That might have been a thing in like 1920. It's not a thing in 2026. So where you live and where you work ought to be two separate things. I know when I was 18, 19, 20, I wanted a girlfriend, okay? I wanted to hang out with people. I wanted to, have a place where I could like put my hair down a bit. I've lost most of it. And so, but I certainly didn't want that to be on a ship. When I think of, the Forward Strike Group, it's going to spend 9 months deployed, perhaps, and they get back home, to think that there's a couple hundred sailors on the forward that they know that that's where they've got to spend the night on the night they come back, that's just broken, okay? So it's just not a thing. So we have worked hard on getting sailors off the ships and ashore. And it's going to tie to your question, so I'm going to get there. We started this, we were about somewhere between, and here's the other thing, and I told Admiral Wyckoff, I didn't even have good understanding of the extent of that problem because I didn't have good data sources that even told me how many sailors are living on ships, if you can believe that. It seems like I should know where every sailor lives. I mean, that shouldn't be a tall ask. But that number we knew was something between around 7,500 to 10,000. It was a big number. Since we've been on this journey, I've chipped away at that to where there's only about something between 2,500 to 3,000 remaining. So we've cut that over half. And the reason we have not done that faster is there are some places that it is harder. So in places like Norfolk, it's a little easier because the capacity for dormitories and unaccompanied barracks are a little bit more robust. Places that are like Japan and perhaps Rhoda is a little more challenged. So some of my forward stations have a little bit less capacity to do that. The only way this works goes by getting young sailors off ships into barracks, sailors that are a little bit longer in the tooth off out of the barracks and into town. Now, I get pushback that it's like, how could a young sailor that was, in the barrack possibly go out in town, CNO? Or how could a young sailor on a ship possibly transition to the barrack? As if you're some kind of inept group of people that can't go pull that off. Well, let me tell you, submariners are not living in submarines. Aviators are not living in hangars. Marines are not living in pup tents, okay? And IW folks are not living in, in a command center somewhere. Everybody else has been able to pull this off, and yet the SWOs just can't go do it. So I just completely dismiss that. But it does take resources, and it takes capacity, and it takes this scheme of how to move that up. And so we had additional authorities put into law that allow me to give BAH now to sailors E4 and below. That had historically been the limitation on that. I have the authority to do that. And so we're going to use that full authority to go do that. Now, sometimes that means you got to be smart, because quite frankly, that can be still expensive and challenging. So it's okay for you to go get some roommates and figure out how to get BAH and maybe pocket a little bit of money and get into an apartment. So all that's on the table, okay? Maybe not as applicable here as it is in other parts of our Navy, but it is. So as we think through this, and the revision of what BAH should be and what COLA should be is something that's always getting revised, and the team helps me think through places where that's not meeting the mark so that I can put that on the radar of the leadership to get those resources in place.
So what I'll add to the CNO's comment is in NDAA 26, so the one that was recently passed, Congress has told DOD to go review how we calculate BAH. All right, because a lot of people don't realize BAH is not, I always do that, BAH is currently set up to not cover 100% of your housing costs. It's only set up to cover about 95%. And as anybody who's lived in a high-cost area knows, the moment I raise BAH, the landlords raise the rent to match the BAH. So we're in this tail chase. And so I think we're going to have to get creative in some ways on how we get after, giving sailors enough money, but then incentivizing landlords in maybe different ways so they're not always raising the BAH. But there is a law. OSW right now is re-examining how we calculate that. One of the problems we have, to be honest, is we're not restrictive enough, and we know this, and we've made this recommendation to OSW. We're not restricted enough in what neighborhoods get added to that calculation, right? We know that there are neighborhoods that nobody in this hangar or nobody in the Navy wants to live in, whether that's because the schools are not good. They eliminate neighborhoods that have like high crime or whatever, but they don't pay attention to schools and some other things that we care about. And so all of that is getting looked at. I suspect within the next 6 months, OSW will come out with some new calculation. So what we're doing right now is supporting that effort that was passed into law, and we'll see what happens. Hopefully that answered your question. And we'll go over here to this mic.
Good afternoon, sir. Lieutenant Commander McNwich with Task Force 166. With all the new AI tools that are coming online for the Navy, what's your strategy to drive standardization and interoperability across the fleet?
Yeah, on AI. How many people use AI? Okay. How many people have some kind of ChatGPT account? I mean, yeah. That's my strategy. Okay. All right. That's my strategy. All right, this is not rocket science. So this is not about a lack of understanding of what, large language models can do. And there's no short of defense industrial-based partners who want to help us integrate those type of technologies into our everyday practices. What we've been restricted on to date is really leadership in the Navy, embracing this at pace and integrating it into our day-to-day practices. And that comes down to a risk model. And so we talk about this quite a bit, again, at our level, about opening the floodgates here a bit. And that's where I want the floodgates opened, okay? So if you lead at any level, and pretty much everybody in this room does, you ought to be demanding that AI be brought into your everyday practices. If you do anything where you have to do it more than once, then something like AI ought to be helping. So that's just, just take that for what it's worth. That could be a work procedure. That could be something in the, your administrative offices, and that could be something on the mock in which you're generating a message. That could be something where you have a sponsor program and the welcome aboard package. So it's endless. So if we do something more than once, AI ought to be helping. I just had a great tour of the Maritime Operations Center, the Fleet Command Center here, in which AI, through things that we call like smart, Maven Smart Systems, are being integrated into our data fusion. So that's at a higher end capability, where all this tons of data from sensors and inputs and links and sources are all coming together in a way through some battle management aids that help me make decisions more effectively and smarter. So that's on the table. There's a whole class of AI that's like things that are facial recognition AI. And you can see how you'd use that for target discrimination. Okay, rules of engagement from autonomous systems. How I paint the bottom and see, is there a mine there? So it can recognize. And one of the reasons I'm not strong here is the Navy, and I imagine this is true across the Joint Force with other services, we have not had a good underpinning data structure, okay, in which our data sources were built from the ground up to bring together in a coherent way. So the Navy's need of data scientists, okay, and a data strategy, and the ability to link disparate data sources needs to be worked on desperately. Now, our ability to do that is getting better. So if you've ever worked in databases, you'll know fields, what you call a field matters. So I may call a field a name, make, model, color, size. That's what I'm talking about. Well, like you can imagine when you've got 100 places where the same data set lives, that the field titles could be different based on who created that database. So with AI, I'm able to actually work through that. I don't have to go try to do, all this kind of manual mapping of this. So we've got companies that are helping us in real time bring legacy data sources together to improve my ability to do this. And so it's not fast enough, but I'm telling you, we're on it. And so that's part of this is data science, data strategy and storage, and cloud technologies is all part of this. So kind of a long-winded answer to let you know that your CNO is huge in AI. I love it. I'm addicted to it myself. It's incredible. And my speechwriters use it. I use it. And again, I love it. My wife has got on board now. I got her using it. And if I can get her on board doing it, anyone can do it. So thank you.
Yep.
Good afternoon, sir. Amy Flanagan with NSA Security. Having been a prior recruiter, so I kind of understand what it takes to get a pair of boots all the way into Great Lakes from somebody's couch. And so my question goes to retention. Is there a better method we can use to actively engage at the deck plate to actually retain the quality talent that we've attributed, that we've got, rather than waiting on full power Navy to some random person to reach out and talk to some sailor or wait for them to re-enlist out of necessity?
Yeah, I think what full power Navy demonstrates, I think, is that when the local leadership knows what that sailor wants, what motivates them, what we could possibly offer to get them to re-enlist, that I won't need full power Navy, right? Full power Navy sits on top of this thing because there are pockets in the Navy where the process I just described are not really working that well. right? And so I think engaged leadership at the divisional and command level is my secret sauce to scale full power Navy, Navy-wide, right? And I think you'll find if you do that, and you, to your point, you don't wait for full power Navy to call your sailor. You say, hey, I have this sailor who really wants to re-enlist, and you go pre-active with NPC. I think you'll find Force Houlihan and everybody up there celebrating the fact that you're being proactive and trying to get that sailor what they want. That's ultimately what they want. And so they're having to do it from a top-down approach, but I think, you know, the grassroots mode is better. To the point on re-enlistment, you know, we're doing extremely well in re-enlistment, but one of the things we've identified is we kind of tend to, I think to your point a little bit, count all re-enlistments as exactly the same. And so I think what we'll see in the next year or two is instead of just saying, hey, Command X, you have to get 65% of Zone A, I'm going to give you quotas, right? So, hey, Command A, you owe me 2 of your 10 bosun's mates, you know, 1 of your engine men, you know, and so I'm going to start tracking how well commands do in ratings that I identify I need, and then if you get me some extra, that's great, but, you know, I think we can target better, and we'll get a better overall distribution of the ratings we need in the retention when we go to the model I just described. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
Hey, McPon, I want you to just, we'll lead turn this one a bit. I want you to talk a little bit about some of the reluctancy, maybe that ties to reenlistment, but certainly to advancement, on some of the myths that are out there regarding billet-based advancement and the fact I have to leave my command to advance.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for the question, CNO. Brilliant. So the Navy a couple years ago decided that our legacy advancement system was not driving the behavior that we need, all right? And so we came up with billet-based advancements, which is an overarching kind of program, and the initial instantiation of that was Senior Enlisted Marketplace, all right? And we didn't get that right, like, you know, year one, but we got it pretty close, and it's been very, very successful. But we have learned, you know, there are opportunities inside of BBA and SEM for people to, you know, there's the CA2P, which is the Command Advance to Position, which is available. In the Senior Enlisted Marketplace, there's ARA, which is the Advanced Realignment, something, can't remember the acronym. So you don't necessarily have to leave your command. And the other thing we identified early was, you know, and this isn't surprising to anybody in the room, we all get to a certain age and we kind of like where we're at, right? And so we've opened up CA2P to include the port in which you're in. So if you're ISIC, like let's say you've screened for advancement, your ship doesn't have a CA2P or your command doesn't have a CA2P, but the one across the pier does, your ISIC and TICOM can offer that up, and you can CA2P staying locally. You just might have to move across the pier. So we're doing a bunch of stuff inside of that to remove as much of the friction and angst out of the process as possible. The other thing we knew going into BBA and Senior Enlisted Marketplace was that our billet base is not correct. All right, and to get this to be fully realized and work, you know, to maximum benefit for the Navy and for you, is I got to get the billet base right. Any OSs in here? OSs? All right. If you go look at the OS billet base, there's like very few E1 to E3s, not very many E4s, a metric, you know, truck ton of E5s, and then it necks right back down to E6s. That's what I mean when I say the billet base is not right. And we knew going into this that we were going to have to fix the billet base. That is largely a resource sponsor and TICOM issue, which CMP is working through with the CNO and some of the things that we're working on. Because what will come with that is not only a better advancement pyramid that, you know, it won't matter. There will always be ratings that, you know, fly through advancements, but to get them more reasonable so it's less of a kind of choose your rate, choose your fate thing when it comes to advancements. And the other thing it will enable is more geographic stability for people who want it. We're currently, CMP has went through and identified for each rating and each home port, how many billets would I need to create a geographic stability for that area that is reasonable. And so we have those numbers. It's coming up to the CNO for a decision, because the other thing that does is it helps get our seashore flow, seashore rotations closer to like 36 instead of, we have some problematic ratings right now where that's not the case. So,
Yeah, if you're a leader in this hangar that, have sailors working for you and you didn't know what he was just talking about, okay, you got to get smart on this. Because this is unfolded fairly quickly, and we don't want to restrict opportunity for our sailors to advance because of a lack of knowledge and a reluctance to put on the next stripe because of the belief they can't kind of stay in the same place. So this is kind of commander's business. Okay.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm I2M Blackledge from NCTS Naples. My question is, why was the Constellation frigate program canceled right when it was reaching maturity?
Yeah, it's great. Love that question. For one of the first times in my recollection, we finally put a fork in something that was broken, okay? And it was not performing, all right? And I don't know of another organization, because I've only served in the Navy my entire working career, that has more sunk cost bias than the United States Navy. We will hang on to something. We just love our stuff. We love our decisions so much. And we can't ever depart with anything. And so I thought it took great courage of the Secretary of the Navy, John Phelan, to really assess the performance of that program, that ship build, as much as we need a frigate, and realize that that shipyard financially and through an inability to meet milestone and develop that ship on the timeline that we needed without it being an exorbitant slip in cost and schedule was unbelievably the right call, okay? So this is not, the need of a frigate, and there was nothing more than I'd love to do and drive around the USS Constellation, but we did not see that ship delivering in any kind of reasonable time frame without that being something that was excessively expensive and just way off schedule. So we decided to go another way. And that, again, that took a lot of briefs, a lot of convincing, and a lot of courage, and a lot of working with Finke and Terry, Marionette Shipyard, to make them understand that this is not something we don't want to give you additional work, but we want your workforce to be perhaps retuned and readjusted to a different ship class that basically you will be able to deliver more effectively. So those negotiations and that work is ongoing. And so what we've done now is made a decision to go a different direction with another type of frigate under the belief, and it's my belief and it's our study, at least at my level, that basing that on the national security cutter design, an extremely mature design, using a very mature process, that we will deliver a United States Navy frigate. My goal is to see one of those by 28. That's our goal. And so that's before we would have seen the Constellation, and this is starting basically with, which is a new class for us, a new type of frigate for us, but based on the maturity of that cutter design, we're going to see that. Now, it's going to be built in flights. That's the goal here. And we have learned when we get going with a flight that we can advance the capability of that flight in steps much more easily than we can if we try to make it the most effective and highest capacity thing on first instantiation. We do this in the submarine force, we do it with the Arleigh Burke program, and it's very effective to do this in flights. So the first flight of the new frigate class, okay, will not have as much capability perhaps as second and third flights. So the key to that will be a very much modular and scalable and containerized approach to some of the force packages that we'll be able to put on that frigate. So it will have great self-defense. It'll be able to, do many, many, many missions, and so it will be able to be upgunned by this modular approach, along with its C4I capabilities, to be a very effective frigate, in my opinion. So, but that's the reason. We just weren't performing. And again, it's very hard to depart with a program once it starts, but the Secretary made that decision. I really applaud that effort. Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir. Lieutenant Commander Blair. I work in Admiral Anderson's fire cell. I've been here for about a year and a half, and I'm headed out 2 weeks to go back to a squadron, be a department head. And not to piggyback on the last question, but it is fairly related, and you began to address it with the end of your answer there. In light of the service combatant programs that have been announced, what we know about them, at least at the on-class level, with the frigate and then a potential new class in the BBG, my question is, in your mind, sir, does that represent a change in the way that we think about and teach and train and execute distributed maritime operations?
Let me just spend a bit on Golden Fleet, okay, the idea. When you roll out something called the Golden Fleet, it immediately gets, fairly quickly associated with, our president. And it can be tied very quickly to just the two initiatives with the battleship and the frigate, okay? But Golden Fleet is the terminology, if you will, to represent the totality of our force design. So this is all about and, not or. So let me state that first. So the battleship and frigate will complement the existing build of our aircraft carriers, our submarines. The Arleigh Burke line will remain very active during this, along with additional amphib ships and support ships and T-based logistics ships, name it, TAOs, TAKs, TATS, you name it. It's TSEB, all those ships. So shipbuilding, shipbuilding, shipbuilding. We have hit a point in time and space in the Navy that I've never seen in my career, in which everybody is behind revitalizing the shipbuilding industry of our country. Congress is behind it. The Secretary of War and OSW is behind it. Secretary of Navy is put in the job specifically to do it. And the President, of course, is behind it. So this is a full court press effort on revitalizing our industrial base to build ships, deliver existing contracted ships on time and on schedule, and then, as the Secretary likes to say, change the way we do business. Our yards have historically underperformed, and we're trying to fix that through a whole host of things. They go from workforce development to making supply chains more resilient, to updating processes on how we use robotics and autonomous systems, to modular buildings and scaled approaches where more yards can help us build the ship and then do final assembly at one of our primes. So all that's in progress to actually upgun and deliver these ships in a more timely manner. So I just want to kind of get that out there of what Golden Fleet is. It is the force design of our Navy and its totality of that. And then how we upgun all that is how we package it. And we will package that general purpose Navy, that force, through tailored packages. You've enjoyed some of that over here. When you get the Thomas Hudner out of cycle, okay, that was not a normal rotational deployment. You needed something to help you do a mission in the Eastern Mediterranean, or perhaps an exercise, in the, maybe off Scotland. And so that force flows out of cycle. So this idea of tailoring forces is part of this as well. And then what upguns all that even more is the utilization, the smart utilization of robotic, autonomous, unmanned systems. All that amplifies, catalyzes, synergizes, and every other adjective and adverb I can think of to actually make that tailored package most lethal and most cost-effective, buying down acceptable level of risk. So all of that's baked into this. Now, specifically, the frigate. Think of the missions, if I have like 30 frigates in the Navy, think of the missions that I can do and posture those forces to utilize that level of capability. Let's say I want to do interdiction missions. I can put a helo on that. I can drive it alongside the Coast Guard for the right, interdiction authorities and do all that with a frigate. I don't need an Arleigh Burke to do that. I can do that with the frigate. That's a mission, okay? Choke point defense maybe can do that type of mission, all right? Maritime domain awareness, okay, can be done with that type ship. ASW can be done with that. I put a containerized towed array on the back of that ship. I've just converted it into a ASW platform. So the frigate's got a lot of mission. As far as the battleship, we are pulling through a lot of technology that was already baked into DDGX design. But what this ship's going to be is a ship, it's going to be a capital ship, first of all, that can embark a task force commander staff, number one, okay? And I'll get to why this is important in just a second. But it's going to pull through a lot of technologies that were already being built into DDGX. But this ship is going to have between 25 to 40%, based on the type of ordnance, more capacity than DDGX, okay? This ship kicks ass, takes names. I mean, I would love to command the battleship, okay? I mean, if you're a SWO in this room and you don't want to get some of that, you're nuts, okay? So this thing is going to have the ability with the electrical power to power megawatt class directed energy, okay? So right now, we're topped out in electrical power. I can go nowhere with that in Arleigh Burke, all right? So that's a problem. This will carry a lot of conventional prompt strike, and we will have the ability to put sea launch nuclear cruise missile too, all right? And then just every other thing that we can shoot. So now, does this change the way we do DMO? All of DMO is predicated on one thing, and it's the most important thing I may say this entire time I have with you. It's the ability to operate without being targeted. So counter-targeting is the only way navies can operate with impunity to get any ship into range to conduct its offensive fires. It's the only way I can get in range to actually do strike missions from the air wing. I have to be able to maneuver and actually inside a very hostile, contested environment to actually get there, to get within range, all right? That's been the way it's been in war since the musket, and that's the way it'll be for 100 years from now. It will always be contested. There will always be somebody shooting at me by the very nature because we're in conflict. And so the idea is, how do I create a window of time and space for me to maneuver to actually go do that? And so what I ask people that push back on me on concentrating force, and isn't it inherently more risky? Well, what I never get is an intellectually honest debate on this. Would you rather shoot 100 things from 100 things or shoot 100 things from one thing? So the scheme of maneuver to pull off this idea that I can do everything with unmanned, go for it. Go try to go make that timing work. That's not a walk in the park. So I've got to have the ability to move things that carry a lot of payload into a place and go actually conduct these very important offensive fires. The second thing is now is how I posture the globe. The Navy has got global mission. I think you would agree with that. Do I need an aircraft carrier to pull into every single place that I want to project power of the United States? Back to the first thing I said on sovereign projection of power. Would you argue, could we all agree that if I had a battleship today, that probably would be the main projection power down in Venezuela? Would that be a good ship for that? Put that down with a couple frigates. So the way I would tailor that package would be exactly what would be needed in that theater, okay? So when you have a high-low mix of capability across this Golden Fleet design, the way I structure packages in the future to approach my key operational naval problems of the future gives me a lot of tailorability to go do that more effectively. So this is not going to impact DMO. It's going to put DMO on steroids because of my increased fungibility and flexibility to tailor these packages more effectively. Now, you know, it comes with a budget. It comes with dollars, all right? Or we're not going to be able to build this. And shipbuilding is expensive. In fact, one of the things when we look at curves across the cost to build a ship, since I've come in the Navy to today, $1 basically doesn't go as far in the shipbuilding parlance. It costs about 3 times per ton what it did today, it costs today than it did when I came in the Navy. So even though we get fairly large, I would say record budgets here, the buying power of those dollars are not as good. So that's my job to go figure that out. And so, but the battleship will play prominently in this. It seems kind of goofy when you hear about it because what pops in your head is the USS Iowa, the Missouri, the whatever. That's not what we're talking about. This thing is a modernized version of DDGX, but with a lot more payload, okay? And so we will use these to posture the globe and make sure we bring the firepower of the United States Navy to bear while preserving the ability to mass aircraft carrier and strike wing capability where we need that capability more effectively. So just think of the fungibility and what this allows me to do. I know it's a long answer, but it was allowed me to actually get a lot of this kind of theory of the fight out.
Admiral McPawn, good afternoon. Lieutenant Commander Coe from 6th Fleet N-22 Analysis and Productions. My question, gentlemen, is regarding Russia and China, especially with their strategic partnership that they've announced since 2022 and the increased interest that China has shown in the Northern Sea Route and the Arctic. What is the Navy doing to prepare for possible Arctic operations in the near to midterm future, sir?
Yeah, you know, the chairman has made a declaration that Russia and China are not aligning. They're aligned, okay? He states it that way. I could not agree more. In fact, it's overdue. You know, if you watch this relationship, you know, from its burgeoning state maybe 5 years ago to what they do today, you know, we see this increased complexity. And so I sometimes think there's some reluctance to admit what we're obviously seeing. And we all know, even with our own allies and partner interaction, that the depth of that relationship, even if it's not that great during peacetime, gets very deep very quickly in war and conflict. So I don't know why we would think the same is not true with, you know, China and Russia. So when you start operating together, the ability to scale the depth of that relationship can change very quickly when the need demands. What also happens with relationships is you get a natural opportunistic menu of things that one side or the other can do just naturally to dilute my ability to counter the thing that I'm trying to actually counter. So you can imagine all types of things like this between those two, where they just try to spoil what we're trying to do just by, you know, diluting my forces with additional activity. You know, again, at an unclassified level. That should kind of make sense to you if you've kind of studied these kind of things. So yes, that relationship should concern us. They're both nuclear powers, okay? That's concerning. They both have global expansion, you know, efforts. They both are investing heavily in asymmetric capabilities to do things that outpunch the normal general purpose force, okay? They do things together, and of course we see this all the time in multiple theaters. When it comes to the Arctic, there's some, well, I think until recently, and I see this wax and wane a bit over time, I'd say there's a bit of Arctic blindness that goes on. People don't pay attention to the Arctic. They don't understand it. They think that some frozen tundra up there, why would anybody care, okay? And then you've got some people that are concerned about, you know, polar ice cap melting, so you get some of that type of concern. But in general, not thinking about it as an area that will one day have higher transit routes through the northern route, that is basically a place where there's over, you know, estimate between $1 to $3 trillion of rare earth, okay, natural gas and petroleum, a place that Russia wants to call its own, all right? And here we are thinking like, you know, what to do. So we have to get after this. Now, China claims, you know, themselves as this, you know, near Arctic, you know, country. Well, I mean, I don't even know what that means. That doesn't mean anything. And I think that, quite frankly, it probably frustrates Russia a bit because they want that to themselves. Well, let me tell you, we're not going to give up on that. That's not happening. Not on anyone's watch, in at least the U.S. Navy. I boil this down to kind of 3 lines of effort here. Okay, number one, you got to have the kit to operate there. How many people have operated above the Arctic Circle? Okay, things get kind of squirrely up there. It's cold, okay, number one. Number two, satellites density is less, so it takes, you know, things that are in polar orbits. Navigation systems have to be flipped around. Charts are more sparse, all these weird things. Your bilges start freezing, you know, you got some issues up there. So you got to go up there to understand all that, all right? So that kind of goes to number two, is there has to be presence there. If you want to actually make sure that people know what you care about, just like my calendar, okay, I care about what I'm attending, like today, then you have to be in the Arctic. You got to be present there. Now, we've got an Arctic Council, a set of countries that are very invested in this too. It's very important that we work with those, okay? There's only one that's not close friends to us, and that's Russia, all right? We are an Arctic nation, okay? So presence matters. And under the, you know, the polar ice cap, you got submarines, U.S. submarines, and we're investing heavily now with the Coast Guard, with Canada and Finland to build icebreakers, something I feel long overdue. And the third thing is allies and partners. We don't have to do this alone, right? So the way we actually demonstrate our unanimity and how we actually counter Russian trying to take over the place, we don't want a 9-dash line around the North Pole. We have to do this for partners and allies, okay? So those 3 lines, I think, are the strategy. Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir. Jim Martini, NSA Naples Security. Firstly, I'd like to say that I think that canceling the Constellation class was probably one of the smartest decisions I've heard the Navy do, so I appreciate that.
Oh, thank you.
My question is also in regards to the fleet, specifically with the LCS.
And what ties into the figure of merit is a compilation of computations that talks about the ability of the ship to deliver naval combat power based on a standard we set for that class of ship. When you get to a certain point and you're not delivering combat power because the return on investment for the money I got to put in based on what I'll get out of it gets to a red line, then that makes a logical decision to inactivate that ship. That would be ideal for me. And it's unemotional. I don't want to ever get rid of a ship. I want them all. I mean, who doesn't? Okay? But I have to actually, because I don't have this to ships, and you can see why we name them after their cities, after their states, and after their people. So it's a natural affinity there. And again, it's hard decisions. So, specifically with LCS, my goal is to wring every ounce of, of design and longevity and class service life out of the LCS. That's my goal. Okay, we've tried to cut bait on some, and we've got some put back into the budget, and we will take that and we will, we'll get after it. Okay, if you're going to exist as a ship in my Navy, you get the full energy of Daryl Caudle. Okay, we don't half-ass it, kind of put you on the sidelines. I'm not going to let that happen. We did that with Tortuga, and I've regretted that ever since, okay? That ship lived in a decommissioning, non-decommissioning, decommissioning, non-commissioning purgatory. I thought it was 5 years. My team told me it was 10. Okay, it's shameful. Okay, we're not going to do that, all right? So if you're on the registry, you're going to go till the bitter end till I get approval to inactivate you. Now, we can do this smart. And so I'll be the first to admit, as long as I'm CNO, I probably will never authorize an aluminum ship to be built again. Okay, that's a non-starter. That wasn't a great idea, in my opinion. I'm not big on a dual crewing a ship that I don't anticipate trying to have at a 70% A sub O, op tempo. We dual crew ballistic missile submarines because we want them at sea 70% of the time. LCS was never going to be at sea 70% of the time. I don't know why I ever dual crewed them. Okay. Now LCS, what's the L stand for? Littoral. Why would I put it in Singapore? How does that make any sense? Seems like to me I'd put it like in a place like where there'd be access to the Black Sea. That's like a littoral. The Eastern Med, the Baltic Sea. Not where I've got to drive 700 miles to get to any action. Okay, so I thought that was not the brightest decision. So how I home port them matters. So the fact we've moved some of the LCS to do mine warfare in Bahrain, that is a great utilization of that ship. The fact that we're using some of the East Coast ones to do 4 fleet operations, great utilization. You get down to the Caribbean, man, you just eat that mission up, okay? And so that's the perfect type of utilization. So the idea that again, it goes back to the question on tailoring the actual problem to the ship class is the future here. So we just got to be smart on how we lay the ship down. Where is it home port? How do we crew it? How do we maintain it? And yeah, LCS will go till till it won't go any longer. So I like the ship. It can do a lot of things for us. It is doing a lot of things. In the Western Pacific, East Coast, and certainly in Fifth Fleet. So it's going to stay around as long as, it has service life. Thank you.
Hey, good afternoon, Admiral. Lieutenant Commander Palomera from Navier Nav 1. Welcome back, sir.
Thank you.
So my question to you is about the national defense strategy and how the impact is going to be over here with NATO and with overseas assignments.
Yeah, the national defense strategy. It followed the national security strategy. And, I didn't put it in the reading list of the CNO, which I recommend you take a look at. I spent a long time thinking through that reading list to land that thing. So I'm trying to get through it myself. And so take a look at that, but it's a good reading list. That should be part of your professional reading, okay? Everybody in this room should read the National Security Strategy. It's not a long read. And then go read at least the unclassed version, if you don't have access to the classified version, of the National Defense Strategy. If you read those documents, you will see in those the actual, I think, a very clear prioritization of the President of the United States and the Secretary of War, okay? It's crystal clear in there. And the number one thing in there is we will defend our homeland, okay? And to do that, we've often said that, and the way we try to think about that is we'll do that because we'll defend far forward. We'll do these things that, we'll shoot the archer way away, and by doing that, we'll, by extension, defend the homeland. Well, I think it was recognized that, yes, we want that, but actually there are no kidding threat vectors to the homeland itself. The world is getting smaller, okay? The United States is not some castle that sits between two moats, right? We're not in a moat anymore. The ability for, Russian forces and Chinese forces to operate with sustained presence off our East Coast and West Coast is just going to grow, okay? It's going to grow more and more. So we have to, and you can't do much about it in peacetime because of just freedom of navigation for them to operate where we do the same thing. So we shouldn't be scratching our head. But now you can park a fairly substantial threat right up against us. The whole idea of Golden Dome, to have a strong defense against intercontinental ballistic missile threats, cruise missile threats, okay, is all part of that. A recognition of the Western Hemisphere that there's illicit trafficking coming into our country as a threat vector, okay? Illegal trafficking of all types of things, from drugs to people to weapons to anything else you can imagine, okay? All those threat vectors have been prioritized in both of those documents. And then it shouldn't surprise anyone that we do have a pacing threat, and that's been recognized to be the PRC. And their capacity, their capability, and the impact of what they can do in the first island chain to global economy, to international world order, and some of those other, very complex relationships of what they can do there has been recognized as something we will focus on as a country. This is not new. This is an extension. The Navy has been doing this for a long time. We've been postured with a 60-40 split for decades, okay? And so that's just kind of the nature that the Pacific is 3 times bigger than the Atlantic. By very nature, the time-distant problem makes that a smart move for us. So we're already focused there, okay? And then there'll be, of course, a persistent desire to offload mission to the extent we can to partners and allies on things that aren't in those 2 buckets, okay? And I can think of no place that body of work that is going on today than right here in Naples, okay? This is about getting partners and allies at a higher capability, helping them integrate with each other and us more effectively, utilizing the suite of capabilities we're talking about, robotics and autonomous systems, more effectively, improving our interoperability with cryptological, communication systems, and, sharing our situational awareness and common operation picture more effectively, okay? And then having an intellectually honest conversation with partners and allies about what they can actually do. And they are well suited to do certain things better than other things, and really demanding, if we can, that they take those on as a priority, to posture their forces to do that. Okay, to actually synergize the entire theater a little more effectively. So I think there's opportunity here. What I see, and I think your commander agrees, is most of the leadership in Europe is embracing this. I think when it first got put out, there could be some, reluctance here. Oh man, what are you saying? But I think they're seeing this as opportunity. They're seeing an opportunity to increase their NATO defense spending. And I think certainly the military leadership sees this as, yes, this is ours to own. We do owe this to our nation and the collective defense of the alliance. So I think it's a great story here, but I think this is ground zero for this mission. So thank you.
Afternoon, CNO, McPon. NC1 Lettuce Stitch, Command Career Counselor for US NMRTC Naples. I wanted to swing back around to the BBA aspect, and with it fully being integrated into the fleet along with SCM, is there a plan in place to prevent the bottleneck of the E6s, 7s, and 8s to get them billeted to let high-performing first classes start moving up and open those quotas back up?
I just want to make sure I understand your question. You mean people who have screened and the
Yes,
bottleneck?
yes, McPond.
Yeah. Well, I think, part of it is fixing the billet base like I talked about earlier. And part of it is, one of the things, for E9 and E8 SEM, one of the things we do is we overscreen, right? And so there are more people eligible to get those jobs than what existed in the old performance system, right, in the old advancement system. So first movers get to go very quickly, right? And so if you're interested in being a first mover and getting advanced before everybody else, you get into the marketplace, you pick the job nobody wants, and you're off and going, right? That's kind of the behavior initially we were looking for and wanted. And so I think that exists today. I don't think, now at E7, we're not overscreening, right? We're matching, that's basically the same numbers we do from year to year. There's a bunch of reasons for that. Most people who screen for chief are not retirement eligible. And so if I overscreen, I can significantly degrade people's opportunity to advance because these people are hanging out for a long time. So I think there's opportunity in the system right now in most ratings to go pretty quickly if you want to. But the other feature in the system is that it does give you choice, right? It does give you the opportunity for 30 months to wait for your ideal, perfect, sweet job, because you've been fleet and stalking Perryman over there at the job you want and you know what his PRD is, right? So I think that's the beauty of senior enlisted marketplaces. If you want to get in there and go anywhere, you can do it. And if, you want to, take your chances and hope that you're the one who gets the one job that you want in this one place, that opportunity is there. So I think both of those things exist now, but the real, I think, solution to the problem is we got to fix the billet base. And there's been a lot of bad behavior throughout my time in the Navy where, it started with top 3 roll down, then it was top 6 roll down, and then, we're pretty much don't have any controls in place for commands if they want to upgrade or downgrade a billet, these billet swap things that then jack up the billet base. So there's work to do there, but I do think there's opportunity inside of it right now to move as quickly as you want to. The sailor scoring criteria is the thing in which we use to pick who kind of gets the most points. I think there's work to do there, to your point, to get the most high performing. I think you're going to see a change soon on how much we weight the rating knowledge exam inside of that. Right now, there's a bunch of us who believe that that's too low, and I want that to be closer to 40 to 50%, and then the rest can be this other stuff. So I think there are changes coming, but I do think it exists in there. If you have specific examples of ratings where it's constipated, just let me know, and I'll go take a look at it, okay?
Thank you.
Is this the last one? Okay. This is it. Make it a good one. You're not on. Hang on. Or speak loudly. No? All right.
Admiral McPong, good afternoon. Ais Terminati from the 6th Fleet N-24 targeting shop. With the rising conflicts in the Middle East between Iran attempting to seize a U.S.-flagged vessel and the shoot-down of the Iranian drone, my question to you, Admiral, is do you see that with the potential to turn into a larger conflict, and are there plans and strategies in place to protect sailors and their families, if so?
Wow, you can talk fast. You said you're IS-1?
IS-2, sir.
Okay, yeah. Well, if you ever leave the Navy, maybe think auctioneering.
Will do, sir.
So I want to make sure I get the question. You're talking about Iranian threat to U.S. forces in the theater.
Yes, sir. And if you believe that there is a chance for that to turn into a larger, wider scale conflict, and any strategies and plans in place to protect sailors and their family if that does indeed happen?
Well, you know, you got a commander up here that spent a lot of time with that very question. And I can think of no Fifth Fleet commander, including the current one, Vice Admiral Renshaw, that doesn't think about this every day to make sure that the sailors and the Joint Force team there and families that are in Bahrain and in the local area, that they are properly protected from a force protection perspective, a force protection umbrella, and the decision to do different types of departures if we think things are going to heat up are always discussions and decisions that are going on between the commander there and the combatant commander with me, and to work through those types of things to ensure that families are safe, okay? And it goes a bit to the age-old question, should we actually, allow families to be there, all right? There's different opinions on this. I'm a big fan is yes, they should be there, okay? I think it's okay. And then we just have to take the appropriate precautions to do what's necessary to ensure they're protected. I think families are essential to effectiveness of a sailor's life. Okay, I'm not a big fan of unaccompanied tours. I'm not even a fan of geo-bachelor tours. Okay, I know I like to wake up every morning and see my beautiful wife's face. Okay, and have some conversations with her when I come home. So I think it's important to have families there. I'll just state that outright. To the specific threat of Iran, it's something that I don't take lightly, but I think we are well overmatched. We overmatch that threat significantly with our capability. I think we understand the threat picture. I understand we're devoting enough intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance to inform our decisions about what to do. I think we have a very good approach to providing the President of the United States military options if he decides to use those. I think Iran knows this, okay? So the fact that we have that type of capability is a strong deterrent over them trying to do something benign or malign to us. And so I don't think that's a significant threat. Is it possible? Of course it is. We've seen it. And that comes in the form of drones. They could be doing some type of ISR, but getting too close to our forces. And so they get taken out. And you just see our ability to do that in a very effective way. I think the partnerships that we have across the Joint Force is extremely, strong in that region. The partnerships we have with the Middle Eastern countries is strong there. And so I think we have the ability to actually ensure that things that we want to do are that we have the basing, the access, and the overflight, and those type of things in place to be effective. So I think that's well known. I think you saw Midnight Hammer and its success. And so we know we have the capability to do things on that order and that scale. So that's an example of that. So, we have great partners with Israel as well, and I think are like-minded in our, with that partner. So, I think we're in good shape. And I think it's something that, it goes to how much force we can afford to put in different parts of the world. This is a little bit tied to the national defense strategy question. We have tried to posture the Fifth Fleet area of operations with a diminished force structure for a long time because, we want to posture more perhaps in the Western Pacific. But as everybody says, and, the enemy gets a boat. And so the posture we have to do, we have to be able to respond. And so it goes back to what I told you at the very beginning. No one can do this like the United States Navy. We can be anywhere in the world in about a week, and certainly within 2 weeks, with, a lot of force. You just saw this with the Abraham Lincoln Strike Group that came from the Indo-Pacific. So I think we're in good shape. We got good intelligence, got great decision-making, got great leadership, and we got the right people there to make sure families are protected. And if something does kick off, we'll make sure they're protected, and we will prevail.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. You want to finish this up?
Oh, yeah. All right. So I will close the way I started. Again, thank you very much for all that you do every day. I think, to a comment the boss made earlier, the Pentagon and the Capitol Hill, they love capability. They love to buy kit. But at the end of the day, none of that works without you. All right, we're a world-class Navy who can do the types of things that the boss talks about, be anywhere in 2 weeks, conduct that operation in Venezuela, all of the amazing things we do, we can only do because of how great you are at your jobs. So keep up the great work. I am incredibly proud to serve with you and our civilian teammates, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your night. Thank you.
I'll make this extremely short. There is nothing that I love to do more than engage and talk with sailors. I wish I could do it all the time. When I look out here, I see just people looking at me with these incredible light bulbs over their head, this enlightened group of highly trained professionals that I don't think we harness the intellectual energy from you to the extent we should. Please, if there is a problem you're encountering, do not be victimized by that. Be a solution provider. Tell your chain of command what that problem is. Provide a recommendation. And don't make it some moonshot. Make it something they can execute and implement. They will be open to this stuff, okay? I'm open to it. You have essays, situational awareness on what's going on at the deck plate that we can never understand, okay? But what I can do is help be taught and then put the resources necessary to get after it. But you have to tell us what those things are so I can prioritize that appropriately. Thank you for what you do every single day. And again, as Mick Pond said, thank your families for us. I look forward to the rest of the time I'm here in Naples with you. And if I get to shake your hand and talk to you, please come up, introduce yourself. And I look forward to meeting you personally and certainly serving with you for the rest of the time I'm in the Navy. So thanks again, team.
Attention on deck.